Okay, the left side is complete. Last thing I did before I put in that top fork nut, which has an O-ring in it, is I filled that fork as per the manual, based on draining versus a rebuild, 145 cc's, and I put 100 of that with 10 weight and 45 with 15 weight. And now I will be doing the other side. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do before I start loosening up these top and bottom fork nuts that actually, the bolts and nuts that actually pinch and hold the fork tube on, I'm going to go ahead and, with everything skewed all the way against the lock on the triple trees, I'm going to go ahead and loosen this very top fork nut. This is the time to do that, but you don't need to pull it out at this point. You want to be careful with your tools around that tank. So if I wasn't taping this, I'd have two hands on it. One hand on the end of the tool, holding the socket, making sure it doesn't come off the wrench, and the other hand, of course, actually turning the wrench on the handle. Okay, so since these Honda, the fork tubes are not tapered or anything, they're really held and located only in place by the pinch bolts on the top and bottom yokes, which are also called triple trees. And so once you loosen those, you don't have to bang it to get it out. Like the Norton has a tapered end on the top of its fork tube that mates with a taper inside the top fork yoke, and it's got a big nut that actually tightens it up in there. So once it's been in there for a long time, you actually loosen the nut and leave most of the threads in there, and then with a piece of wooden hammer with the pinch bolt at the bottom, you loosen that, of course, and then you bang it really good with the piece of wood in place so you don't mess up your chrome, and it'll come loose. But with the Hondas, you don't have to do that. You just loosen up the top, which has one bolt going through, and then I'll do the bottom fork yoke, which has two. And once I do that, it should slide right out. Okay, like on the bottom fork yokes, the pinch bolts, there's actually two of them, and the threads are inside of the cast piece, and they're going to be pretty tight. So the thing to do is loosen up the top one, but don't get it real loose. Just break it loose and keep it snug, and then do the same to the bottom one, and then you can work the top one loose and the bottom one loose and bring them out. Okay, so one thing you want to do before you loosen that last one, which I always loosen the very bottom one here on this XL Honda, is hold on to the fork tube or it will drop, it'll smash down. And before I even started this side, I adjusted everything to make sure I had clearance, as you will see, so I could bring this on down. Just taking my time until I clear that bottom yoke, and voila, I've got one loose. Okay, now that I've got this this whole fork assembly out and keeping the fork tube, the top of it up, and because I've already loosened this fork top nut, I should be able to get this off pretty easily. Now it is under spring pressure, but it's not under a lot of pressure. But however, there are a lot of bikes where it is, so you want to be careful. You want to hang on to it, have a rag over it, whatever. Just make sure you know that when you finish that last thread, it's going to pop up. So I'll do that now. Yeah, these little Hondas, not under that much pressure, so it'll pop up a little bit. Just keep the top up at this point if you don't want a big mess. And when you go to put it back together, you have to put pressure on to get it back down, but it's really not that big a deal. So now that that's loose, I'll pull it out, and there'll be a spring there, and I can push the bottom slider up and expose more of that spring. And it's messy, and I'm fixing to turn this all upside down and hang the spring and all that, and you'll see that after I pull it apart. Okay, so what I've done is I pushed the slider up on the fork tube, and that reveals the spring. And then I tied a piece of safety wire that I already have set up on this angle iron. And now when I pull this spring out, it can dangle and drip into this pan I have down here, which I'm also going to use to capture the oil that's in the fork tube, and then measure it, because I do want to see how much was in there before I pulled it apart, and I've already done that on the other side. Okay, so I have this spring hanging. It's not that wet because I've kept this fork tube in the up position pretty well. And now I'm going to turn this thing upside down over this pan, and I'm going to pump it, and that'll help get the oil out of the dampener tube that's inside there. And then I'm going to set it up so I can let it sit there and drain for the next hour or so. Okay, so there you have it. I got it set, pumped it several times, got a good bit out there. Not near enough, but anyway. And I got the spring rigged up, or if it drips, it'll go in the pan, though I don't think it's that wet. And the O-ring on the fork top nut, this one looks fine. I don't know what the Japanese use back in 1975, what kind of rubber they use, but it's sure superior to the stuff that the British bikes have, because a lot of this rubber, in fact the majority of it on this 1975 motor, or this is the 78, excuse me, it's still good. Anyway, there you have it.